Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by
the Bartlett Area Chamber of Commerce and its member Renaissance Bank, committed to supporting the growth of businesses in the greater Memphis area. Community banking with local expedited decision making. Details at renaissancebank.com. Renaissance Bank, member FDIC.
the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The new director of Memphis Housing, Community, and Development, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Paul Young, newly appointed director of Memphis Housing and Community Development. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Along with Madeline Faber, reporter with the Memphis Daily News. I say newly appointed, it's probably, a couple months now that you've been in the position?
About 4 months in, January 1st.
Okay,
So.
First time we've had you on the show. Thank you for being here. Real quickly, but it's a complicated question, what does Housing and Community Development, that division do? We talked before the show, there's about 80 employees. It is involved in a whole range of projects. How do you summarize what you do?
So the Division of Housing and Community Development receives about $15 million annually of federal funding to support housing development throughout the city of Memphis. We're the designated agency for those entitlement funds. Typically, those funds come from HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So we have a number of programs to support the development of affordable housing. We're also, a lot of people know us for our work that we've done on different developments throughout the city. So when the city decides that it's going to take on a major development, typically the Division of Housing and Community Development leads those development projects.
That in the past has included the public housing projects, the 10 or so big public housing projects that have been transformed, and we'll talk a lot about that. But also Housing and Community Development was involved with
Bass Pro, the conversations around the fairgrounds.
Right.
We led the development of the garage for Overton Square.
Right.
So all of those major projects that the city takes on, HCD is typically involved in one way or another.
And you follow in the footsteps of a kind of legendary figure in Memphis politics and Memphis power broker, Robert Lipscomb. And what is it like to follow that? Lipscomb's departure was strange, and there are a lot of allegations, and I don't really want to focus on all that, but he was involved with a lot. He was at one point head of HCD, along with Memphis Housing Authority, along with, at one point, he was chief financial officer in the city. Right. A tremendously powerful person. Some people said too powerful. Some people said he did amazing things. What's it like to follow somebody like that?
Well, I'm honored. I mean, I think that Robert did a lot of great things for this city. His legacy is unrivaled. I mean, you look at the transformation of public housing, you look at projects like Bass Pro that are very big, complicated, and difficult to pull off. He was able to make those things happen. So I'm honored to be able to follow in his footsteps. And, all of the allegations and all those things aside, because I don't get into that, I just want to make sure that what I do has equal emphasis on the work at the neighborhood level. And he did a lot of that work in the neighborhoods and in the communities, but I want to make sure that we elevate the profile of that work that we do that touch the everyday person on a regular basis.
Just one last thing on Lipscomb. One of the criticisms of him was that there was not a particularly transparent office, and certainly in the media we would be sometimes frustrated. But I heard other politicians, other people. What's your approach to transparency and communication with the public? I don't want to make it about the media, but to the taxpayers and the people who want to know how's that money being spent, what projects is HCD involved in, and so on. What's your approach to those kinds of things?
My approach is to just be as open as possible. I know that communication and collaboration, all of those things are important to the success of any of the projects that we do. So I want to do everything I can to make sure the public is informed and aware of the direction that we're going and the process that we've gone through to make those decisions. And I think that will help me as we move forward, make sure that the community is involved.
And I should clarify before I go to Madeline that the Memphis Housing Authority is now separate from your position, so you may work hand in hand with them. I don't know, we'll talk about that later, but you're not. I may have implied that you are over that as well, and you're not. But Madeline.
Actually, what I'd like to harken back to Lipscomb just a tiny bit.
All right.
How, at one point, Lipscomb, as Eric said, was head of HCD and MHA. And how do you see yourself in your new role working with MHA, and sort of how are these departments different?
Absolutely. So MHA is responsible for the management of public housing throughout the city of Memphis, and we will be working hand in hand with them, particularly on the South City project, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. But it'll be a collaborative relationship, and we'll work hand in hand. I think the new director will probably be in the fold in the next 2 months or so. They're going through the process now to make a selection, and so I look forward to that person coming on board and working with them as we work to continue this great work we've been doing in the communities and transforming public housing.
And you are jumping in feet first into a project that Lipscomb sort of got the wheels rolling on, that being the South City project. And from what I understand, where you are right now is engaging in the relocation of the residents of Memphis's last traditional public housing complex throughout the city. So we can work on demolishing that over the summer, from what I understand, and moving forward with a new mixed income project.
Right.
What are some of the challenges that you're facing now? You know, what's on your plate? What are you working with right now? And sort of how do you see this project maybe moving in a different direction under your leadership?
And I'm just going to orient viewers. South City is it's Foot Homes. Is that
Yes.
Foot Homes? It's what is that, to the east of FedEx Forum, South Main area, the last of those housing projects. But go ahead.
Right. So South City is a big project,
Huge,
and
yeah.
obviously we're in partnership with the Memphis Housing Authority. They actually own the property. And where we are, the relocation will start. Now, when you say, are you doing this? I just assume us as a project, because MHA is actually in charge of the relocation and the demolition. We're partnered with McCormick, Baron Salazar, which is a development firm out of St. Louis that focuses on this type of work. So we are moving forward on that process. And right now there are 420 units on the site. We look to rebuild 712 units, so it will be more dense. We will have about 480 of those units will be, I shouldn't say public housing, but residents that live in public housing now will be able to qualify for at least 480 of those units. So we will have more replacement sites than exist today, and it'll be mixed income. You won't be able to tell the difference between one unit or a market rate unit. So.
And is that the model that people who've maybe seen? Is it Uptown or Soulsville,
University Place, College Park,
which is at
Legends
Lamar
Park,
and 240?
Exactly.
And so what's the one next to Methodist? That's
Legends Park.
That's
yeah.
Legends Park.
The
Okay, so
Dixie Home.
aesthetically and just kind of the feel is truly transformative. When you look back at these 9 or so projects that have been done, that are the housing, the kind of, I don't know, I mean, I don't want to, it is people's homes, but it's kind of run down, kind of difficult neighborhoods. How do you measure the success or lack of success in these other projects? Clearly, from a drive-by, it's an aesthetically huge improvement, and you've got mixed use, and you can point to certain things. But how do you measure success of these past projects and of South City?
Well, I think that one of the things we want to do is see what impact we have on the neighborhoods around those redevelopment projects. And what we want to see in Foot Homes is we want to see more of that development spread than being isolated on the site. In fact, that was one of the ways that the grant was actually structured, so that cities are now vested partners with the grant, whereas in previous versions, which they called Hope 6, it was just the housing authority that signed the grant agreement that went forward on these projects. With Choice Neighborhoods, which is the newest rendition of the program, HUD has asked that cities actually sign an agreement to say that they're going to partner with the housing authorities to make a more measurable impact in the community. And so we're looking at things like adding grocery stores, looking at improving transportation and transit access in the community, doing some placemaking initiatives, eliminating blight. So when you talk about metrics, we want to see all of those indicators in the area around the property that's being impacted
Because
change.
with Uptown, that was one, I don't know, I don't want to say failure, but disappointment, I think, that people hoped that in that area along, not far from St. Jude, and that the housing project was transformed, but not as much commercial came as there was hope for a grocery store, there was hope for some other things. Now, there was also a really massive recession, but so how do you go into South City, and I assume you haven't forgotten about Uptown,
No, we haven't.
and make some of those commercial developments, those placements, how do you make those happen?
So and just to touch on Uptown, because you mentioned it, that work is not done. We are still working in Uptown. The Community Redevelopment Agency is still continuing that work, and we hope to see that work continue moving forward. In terms of trying to make those projects happen, the grocery store, we just want to be very deliberate on working with different partners to try to bring resources to that community. And with our development team, we're hopeful that we will be able to get those resources in place.
Right.
And HCD is also engaged in a master plan being developed for the Pinch District in accordance with some other government groups and especially with some major community partners in the area, namely St. Jude. My question, and the way they're set up is you can see them, on either side of a line, areas that have been a little bit disinvested. How do you see the work that you're trying to bring about in the Pinch? How do you see it in comparison with the work in South City, and sort of what are your goals for the Pinch District?
I think they align perfectly. In my mind, I think we're bookending downtown. And our hope is that the redevelopment work that we see at South City and in the Pinch and Uptown filters out to the rest of the community. So further into South Memphis, connecting with the work that's happening down with the works over at near St. Andrew's AME Church, and the same thing going towards Klondike Smoky City when it comes to Uptown. In terms of the partners on the Pinch project, we're partnered with the Division of Planning and Development. We're working with the Downtown Memphis Commission, and our goal is to try to create an environment around St. Jude that is lively and vibrant, that also complements the Bass Pro development, and really connect the dots in that community.
Could more housing be planned for the Pinch?
Sure. I mean, I think that it would be in a mixed use style, but yeah.
What you talked about connection, that gets to this question of the bridge, or some kind of pedestrian bridge that connects the Pinch District to Bass Pro. There was a lack of clarity and some confusion about who's responsible for that. Bass Pro said, we're not responsible for that. Will that be under HCD? Will that be part of this planning process to build some sort of connection?
As we look at the plan for the Pinch, we want to make sure that we're looking at connectivity to Bass Pro and also connectivity to the Convention Center, which is another strong anchor in that part of the city.
Yeah. I want to go back to the public housing thing, a couple things back on that. There's a lot to talk about with the Pinch, but one is, do you measure, you talked about housing, that you've got people with subsidies, people not, the mixed income approach. Do you measure that? Is there some sort of measure of success with that you have X percent of the housing that is not subsidized is occupied? I mean, is that a metric you use, or in terms of looking at how mixed income that neighborhood remained?
Yeah, I'm sure there is a science behind it. I don't know because the unit mix was figured out before I came on board. But our goal is to make sure that in the past, what you've seen are developments that concentrate poverty, and when you concentrate poverty, the result aren't good things.
Yeah, right.
And so what we're trying to do is diversify the communities that we work in and make it a place where anybody would want to live and they're able to thrive.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it answers the question I was about to ask, which is, why is this important? Yeah. Because there's a lot of money involved. The city has, South City alone, the city comes up with about 30 million over a few years. That's then matched against 230, 260 or something like that roughly from the federal government. There's private money coming in. We did a show on it, 6 months ago, with Henry Turley and Archie Willis, and I can't remember if Henry was on, but so there's the money involved. It's a big, at a time when Memphis is, got a lot of needs, a lot of issues. Why is public housing still important? Isn't it? I mean, there's got to be somebody watching the show who's thinking, if people should just be able to live on their own, we shouldn't be subsidizing housing, or at most we should just, give it totally over to the private sector go completely a voucher system and the city and governments get out of all this public housing. What's your response to those kinds of thoughts?
My response is, we have tremendous issues in this community. We have 30% of our population that's living in poverty, and we owe it to the residents of this community to work to improve it. The voucher system works, and it's a good thing, but we still have islands of poverty, and Foot Homes has been one of those islands. And the more we can connect it to the fabric of downtown and the community, the better off we all will be, and as well as the residents that live there now.
Yeah, Madeline.
Here's another project that we know not so much about, something that Lipscomb tried to get off the ground in his previous years, the redevelopment of Mason Village, which is now kind of an empty lot. It used to be the Crump Fowler home surrounding the Mason Temple. Can you tell us a little bit about what is planned for that site and what Strickland has envisioned for it in his budget proposal?
Yeah, Mason Village is an 80-unit apartment community. It will be affordable housing. It'll be funded through a mix of city funds and tax credits and debt for the property. I think overall it's about a $12 million project. But we are excited about it because it adds to the portfolio of affordable housing in this community for which there's a deficit. The project is being coordinated by Kojic, and we're excited to partner with them on that development, and it's in close proximity to downtown. As you mentioned, it's right off Crump and I think 3rd. So we're excited to see us add that affordable housing to the downtown mix.
So what all is entailed in that project?
When you say entailed,
Like with South City, we keep hearing about a grocery store, a retail strip, a daycare. Is that far-reaching kind of plan part of what's envisioned for Mason Village?
Yes, good question. So there are broader plans for the neighborhood to bring some more commercial in that area, but the project, which I was just talking about, is solely for the development of the 80 units of affordable housing. The additional plans haven't been finalized.
And so let's go back to the pinch for a second. I'm bouncing this around, I apologize, but the pinch, have you seen, I mean, there's the big sort of, $9 billion gorilla in the room is that what is St. Jude going to do? Yeah. Do you want to make some news today and tell us what St. Jude is going to do? I mean, or do you know what their plans are? I mean, are their plans in terms of what they want with a lot of that property they own, what they want to do with their properties? Have you seen that? Do you know that?
I haven't seen it. I know that they're still working on what their ultimate plan is going to be. I know that what the city and county have committed to is creating an environment around their facility that encourages their families to feel comfortable and go out and be able to take a load off from a stressful situation. And so we want to create a vibrant environment around their facility. Does
HCD own property in there? No. I remember way back when when some of these plans were originally talked about, this redevelopment of the Pinch District in conjunction with Bass Pro, there was talk of eminent domain. Right. Is that going to happen? Would HCD seize any of these properties through eminent domain?
We haven't decided on what the development approach will be. That definitely was a conversation back in 2010.
Yeah.
The goal was to purchase properties in the Pinch and create an environment that would complement Bass Pro with different shops and making it pedestrian friendly and all of that good stuff. We haven't decided what approach we will take in terms of creating the environment. We want to get the plan together, and we could still go that route, acquire the properties and redevelop it in the manner that we see fit, or we could work with Downtown Memphis Commission and use incentives to encourage the private sector to do it. That hadn't been determined yet.
What's the timeline of making those kinds of decisions?
So the timeline for completing this plan is we really want to get it done before the end of the summer.
Okay.
And so after we get the plan completed, then that'll start the process of looking at
and funding for this kinds of things. Where will the money come from?
So we're looking at the TDZ that
Okay.
currently exists and seeing if there's a way to use some of that capacity.
Talk
to
about what a
support-
TDZ is.
Sorry.
Yeah,
the
no, that's okay. But,
Tourism Development Zone,
Okay.
which is what funded Bass Pro.
and that's
the
where
pyramid.
a certain amount of the sales tax that's spent within Bass Pro, instead of going to Nashville and cities actually get a small amount of that sales tax
Exactly.
back, all of it stays in Memphis, in that
exactly.
zone. And
Exactly.
it's used to help pay for bonds on the pyramid and now also this project. Is that a fair description?
That's perfectly
Okay,
accurate.
good.
Yes.
Okay. What sort of, what do you have a sense of funding or budget? Like what kind of budget you'd be looking at this?
We don't know yet.
Don't know yet,
That's
okay.
all to be determined.
All to be determined. Okay, Mallory.
I have another question about the pinch. How far back do conversations about this kind of cross, so many different areas, DMC being an independent group, several different groups of City of Memphis government working together to redevelop the area. How far back do those conversations go in relation to St. Jude?
How far back? You mean
Yeah.
time-wise?
Yeah, time-wise.
I'm not sure,
Okay.
to be honest. I know that when I came into this role, I think that they had a few discussions, and HCD was serving as the point. And what I wanted to do is make sure that we bring in the other stakeholders. We're having conversations with the convention center to make sure that we are inclusive of their plans and making sure that whatever we develop on paper works for all of the stakeholders in that community.
What you talk about point, the fairgrounds. I think earlier you described it as HCD had a role in the conversation, but a lot of people viewed it as a Robert Lipscomb project, that what was going to happen at the fairgrounds. There was talk of retail, there was talk of big box retail, there was talk of all this transformative. Then there was a bit, ULI, Urban Land Industry came in, did a kind of an analysis and talked about changes. There's the question of the Coliseum. Are you going to be front and center? Are you going to have the kind of role in the fairgrounds that your predecessor had, or what?
We will, the fairgrounds, and Mayor Strickland has stated this in numerous forums, that it's not the highest priority for the administration right now. He wants to focus on being brilliant at the basics. But obviously the fairgrounds is a huge asset for this city. HCD will certainly be involved in the conversations, and we will work with different stakeholders throughout the community to try to figure out what the future of the fairgrounds will be, including the Coliseum.
Okay, just 3 minutes.
Going back to Mason Village, what are the timelines on that project?
So Mason Village is included in this year's CIP budget, which has not yet been approved, but we'll be presenting to City Council this week. Once we get final approval on the budget, we expect it to move forward around June, July.
Okay.
You will start to see some movement.
With those residents, and remind me again how many units would be made up of in Mason Village?
80 units,
okay.
all affordable.
And you said earlier that there's a deficit of affordable housing in Memphis. How have you determined that? What are some metrics behind that?
So there was a study that was completed. I will probably flub on the name, but it was called the Affordable Housing Gap Analysis for 2016. It was completed probably a month ago. And one of the numbers that they talked about, the percentage of housing available for residents that make under 30% of the area median income. They said the number of people was around 44,000 in the city of Memphis, and that for every 100 residents, we had about 30 units available. So that speaks to the availability of housing for our low-income residents. That's just one off the top of my mind.
Yeah. But prior to this, let's go a little bit of your background. You were in the county mayor's office?
Yep, I worked in the county Mayor Luttrell's office. I was the director of legislative affairs. I served as the administrator for the Office of Sustainability. I've also worked at LISC, which is Local Initiative Support Corporation in New York, and then I also worked with Community Capital with Archie Willis, and we worked on actually Legends Park and University Place, so I was involved with those projects.
And you're a Memphian?
Born and raised, graduated from East High School.
Okay, and Greenprint is talk about what we've done. We've had some of the folks. You're I guess the person who followed you, John Zena, has been on the show to talk about Greenprint. In some ways, it kind of jives with some of what you're doing now.
Absolutely.
It's not. I mean, you think if I say Greenprint, people think, well, yeah, Green Line and trails and bike lanes.
Right.
You had already mentioned transportation and making these neighborhoods true neighborhoods that are interconnected. But talk about how Greenprint intersects with what you're doing now.
So Greenprint really lays the foundation for comprehensive planning in the region. Really, we use greenways and trails as a way to provide a forum for us to talk about planning and really develop this network of greenways and trails that could serve as recreation and transit opportunities. But we also wanted to connect neighborhoods to opportunities. And so when you start looking at it from that perspective, and how can you get people from point A to point B to go from where they reside to areas of opportunity, then you start intersecting with the work that we do. And when we look at funding affordable housing in the community and how it's located and situated and what amenities are around it, then Greenprint really kind of lays the foundation and a baseline for us to have those discussions.
And does that include you in conversation with MATA and trying to, how they,
Absolutely.
all that, and that's part of it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're out of time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Madeline, thank you. And thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the Bartlett Area Chamber of Commerce and its member Renaissance Bank, committed to supporting the growth of businesses in the greater Memphis area. Community banking with local expedited decision making. Details at renaissancebank.com. Renaissance Bank, member FDIC.